Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost of the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. There was considerable drawing back, so I slid out, thinking maybe there was going to be trouble. The streets was full and everybody was excited. Everybody that's seen the shooting was telling how it happened, and there was a big crowd packed around each one of these fellows, stretching their necks and listening. One long, lanky man with long hair and a big white fur stovepipe hat on the back of his head and a crooked handled cane marked out the places on the ground where Boggs stood and where Sherburne stood, and the people following him from one place to the other and watching everything he done, and bobbing their heads to show they understand, and stooping a little and resting their hands on their thighs to watch him mark the places on the ground with his cane. And then he stood up straight and stiff where Sherburne had stood, frowning and having his brim hat down over the eyes, and sung out, "Boggs!" and then fetched his cane down slow to a level, and says, "Bang!" staggered backward, says, "Bang!" again, and fell down flat on his back. The people that had seen the thing said he done it perfect. Said it was just exactly the way it all happened. Then as much as a dozen people got out their bottles and treated him. Well, by and by everybody said Sherburne ought to be lynched. In about a minute everybody was saying it, so away they went, mad and yelling, and snatching down every clothesline they came to do the hanging with. Chapter 22. They swarmed up towards Sherburne's house, whooping and raging like Injuns, and everything had to clear the way or get run over and tromped to mush. And it was awful to see. Children was heeling it ahead of the mob, screaming and trying to get out of the way, and every window along the road was full of women's heads, and there was black boys in every tree, and bucks and wenches looking over every fence, and as soon as the mob would get nearly to them they would break and scuttle back out of reach. Lots of the women and girls was crying and taking on, scared most to death. They swarmed up in front of Sherburne's palings as thick as they could jam together, and you couldn't hear yourself think for the noise. It was a little 20-foot yard. Someone sung out, "Tear down the fence, tear down the fence." Then there was a racket of ripping and tearing and smashing, and down she goes, and the front wall of the crowd begins to roar in like a wave. Just then Sherburne steps out onto the roof of his little front porch with a double-barrel gun in his hand and takes his stand perfectly calm and deliberate, not saying a word. The racket stopped and the wave sucked back. Sherburne never said a word, just stood there looking down. The stillness was awful creepy and uncomfortable. Sherburne run his eye slow along the crowd, and wherever it stuck the people tried a little to outgaze him, but they couldn't. They dropped their eyes and looked sneaky. Then, pretty soon, Sherburne sort of laughed. Not the pleasant kind, but the kind that makes you feel like when you're eating bread that's got sand in it. Then he says slow and scornful, "The idea of you lynching anybody, it's amusing. The idea of you thinking you had pluck enough to lynch a man, because you're brave enough to tar and feather poor friendless cast-out women that come along here. Did you that make you think you had enough grit to lay your hands on a man? Why, a man's safe in the hands of 10,000 of your kind, as long as it's daytime and you're not behind him. Do I know you? I know you're clear through was born, raised in the South, and I've lived in the North, so I know the average all around. The average man's a coward. In the North, in the North, nobody he lets anybody in the North, he lets anybody walk over him that wants to, and goes home and prays for a humble spirit to bear it. In the South, one man all by himself had stopped a stage full of men in the daytime and robbed the lot. Your newspapers call you a brave people so much that you think you are as braver than any other people, whereas you're just as brave, and no braver. Why don't your juries hang murderers? Because they're afraid the man's friends will shoot them in the back, in the dark, and it's just what they would do. So they always acquit, and then a man goes in the night, with 100 masked cowards at his back, and lynches the rascal. Your mistake is that you didn't bring a man with you. That's one mistake. And the other is that you didn't come in the dark and fetch your masks. You brought part of a man, Buck Harkness, there. And if you hadn't had him to start you, you'd have taken it out in blowing. You didn't want to come. The average man don't like trouble and danger. You don't like trouble and danger. But if only half a man like Buck Harness there shouts, "Lynch him! Lynch him!" you're afraid to back down. Afraid you'll be found out to be what you are, cowards. And so you raise a yell and hang yourselves onto that half a man's coattail and come raging up here, swearing what big things you are going to do. The pitifullest thing out is a mob. That's what an army is, a mob. They don't fight with courage that's born in them, but with courage that's borrowed from their mass and from their officers. But a mob without any man at the head of it is beneath pitifulness. Now the thing for you to do is to droop your tails and go home and crawl in a hole. If any real lynching is going to be done, it will be done in the dark, southern fashion. And when they come, they'll bring their masks and fetch a man along. Now leave, and take your half a man with you, tossing his gun up across his left arm and cocking it when he says this. The crowd washed back sudden and then broke all apart and went tearing off every which way, and Buck Harkness he heeled it after them, looking tolerable cheap. I could have stayed if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. I went to the circus around the backside, till the watchman went by, and then dived in under the tent. I had my $20 gold piece and some other money, but I reckoned I'd better save it, because there ain't no telling how soon you are going to need it. Away from home and amongst strangers that way. You can't be too careful. I ain't opposed to spending money on circuses when there ain't no other way, but there ain't no use in wasting it on them. It was a real bully circus. It was the splendidest sight that ever was when they all come riding in two and two, the gentlemen and ladies side by side, the men just in their drawers and undershirts and no shoes nor stirrups, and resting their hands on their thighs easy and comfortable. There must have been 20 of them, and every lady with a lovely complexion and perfectly beautiful, and looking just like a gang of real sure-enough queens, and dressed in clothes that cost millions of dollars and just littered with diamonds. It was a powerful fine sight. I never see anything so lovely. And then one by one they got up and stood and went a-weaving around the ring so gentle and wavy graceful, the men looking ever so tall and airy and straight, with their heads bobbing and skimming along away up there under tent roof, and every lady's rose leafy dress flapping soft and silky around her hips, and she looking like the most loveliest parasol. And then faster and faster they went, all of them dancing, first one foot out in the air, and then the other, the horses leaning more and more, and the ringmaster going round and round the center pole, cracking his whip and shouting, "Hi, hi!" and the clown cracking jokes behind him, and by all hands dropped the reins, and every lady put her knuckles on her hips, and every gentleman folded his arms, and then how the horses did lean over and hump themselves. And so one after the other they all skipped off into the ring, and made the sweetest bow I ever see, and then scampered out, and everybody clapped their hands and went just about wild. Well, all through the circus they had done the most astonishing things, and all the time that clown carried on it so it most killed the people. The ringmaster couldn't ever say a word to him, but he was back at him quick as a wink, with the funniest things a body ever said. And how could he ever think of so many of them? And so sudden and so pat, was what I couldn't no way understand. Why, I couldn't get a thought of them in a year, and by a drunk man tried to get into the ring, said he wanted to ride, and said he could ride as well as anybody that ever was. They argued and tried to keep him out, but he wouldn't listen, and the whole show could come to a standstill. Then the people began to holler at him and make fun of him. Then that made him mad, and he began to rip and tear. So that stirred up the people, and a lot of the men began to pile down off of the benches and swarm towards the ring, saying, "Knock him down! Throw him out!" And one or two women began to scream. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.